we ready to go?
All right, yeah, we are. We're on, this will be episode 7 of the series of podcasts. So we had previously done a podcast on husbandry, and we had talked about quite a few medications, and there were a few that we missed, though, that you wanted to come back and say a few words on.
One thing I will do is I'll preface this with the fact that we don't sit down and do a highly organized outline of what we're going to cover, that these are, for the most part, spontaneous events. There's a little bit of structure, a little bit of presenting of a question and then letting it go wherever it goes. And with my mind, that's a dangerous thing. You get what you get. Whenever we did the section on animal husbandry, we had a couple of other questions that we intended to address in some form in that session, and we talked a lot. I talked a lot about husbandry, but it was not comprehensive, and the fact that it was not comprehensive was brought out and shared by folks who submitted comments, and they said essentially, well, why didn't you fully delineate everything that needed to be known about this or that? And there was 3 things that, in my opinion, were highly legitimate and needed to be addressed in order for this to be more than just a tease, for it to be somewhat comprehensive in addressing the topic that was approached. So one of them was, what's the dosage with praziquantel? I don't remember everything that I said about worming or about tapeworms and why you would need to use praziquantel. So I will cover that subject a little more in depth, just to make sure that in one place or the other that it was sufficient information was presented. The reason you use praziquantel is because there is one type of tapeworm called the Echinococcus tapeworm that no other wormer that we normally use will eliminate. Fenbendazole will clean out, will kill all different kinds of tapeworms except for the Echinococcus tapeworm. There are some countries in Europe, Finland being one of them, in which they don't even have the Echinococcus tapeworm. So anytime you ship a dog there, you have to treat your dog with praziquantel in the last 48 hours with a single dose of praziquantel. On a yard the size that we have, every time we worm with fenbendazole, we also throw in 2 days of treatment with praziquantel. The traditional wisdom is that 1 day of praziquantel is sufficient for eliminating the Echinococcus tapeworm, as evidenced by the stipulation that you only treat 1 time, and that's sufficient before you ship to these destinations in Europe in which they don't have the Echinococcus tapeworm. We do it for 2 days just because we want to be absolutely sure. And I would be pretty confident if we drop back to just 1, but whereas 1 day with ivermectin is deemed to be sufficient for eliminating hookworms, 2 days means you're pretty damn sure. And we do the same thing with the praziquantel. We do 2 days whenever we do 3 to 4 days of fenbendazole in every 3 month worming session. All right, so I buy the praziquantel that we use from the same source where I buy the fenbendazole. I buy it pure praziquantel in a powdered form in a full kilo size. And I think I probably pay $350, $400 per kilo. And you guys who like to do math, you can sit down and calculate that and determine the economy of it. But it is, I promise you, it's a lot more efficient than buying Drawntail Plus. Drawntail Plus is Fibantal, Parentel, and Praziquantel, because again, there's only one medication that will eliminate the Echinococcus tapeworm, and that's Praziquantel. All right, so having said all of that, you still want to know the dose. I can tell you that what I do, and I've gone out to my shop and grabbed my notes out there, because some of this stuff, if you only do it once a year, you don't necessarily remember all the details. But whenever I'm mixing it, I will mix 75 grams of Praziquantel with 15 pounds of RF1. RF1 is so tasty to a dog and so healthy for a dog that you can thoroughly mix 75 grams with 15 pounds, and they will readily eat it. Whatever natural problem that they might have with the taste of Praziquantel is overwhelmed by their natural attraction to the RF1. Whenever we mix 75 grams of Praziquantel with 15 pounds of RF1, and I mean thoroughly mixed, we probably spend 20 to 30 minutes mixing that amount using a paint mixer on a drill. And you have to remember, once you feel like you've mixed it enough, then you basically turn it upside down, because there's areas that are in the bottom of the tub that you can't fully get the mixer to, so it just lays there and never gets mixed. So when you turn it upside down, you're able to get it and distribute it homogeneously throughout the entire mix. So at any rate, a moderately rounded tablespoon of this mixture is sufficient for 60 pounds of body weight, and it comes out to 136 milligrams per 60 pounds. So if you want to cut that down, if you got a 30-pound dog, then, well, if you can do half of 136, which I'm pretty sure that's it would be 68 milligrams would do 30 pounds. And anybody that's got a calculator on your phone can break it down into the various sizes based on that ratio. 136 milligrams per 60 pounds. Okay, I probably have beaten that horse to death. I think it's probably as much as you need to know about Praziquantel. Let me see if there's any noticeable effects. Brad, whenever you do the yard with Praziquantel, have you done it in isolation, or is it always with fenbendazole?
It's always with fenbendazole.
Yeah, so you don't see a difference apart from what you would normally see with fenbendazole? In other words, is it especially harsh, or does it diminish appetite, or are there any consequences that you know of? Any side effects, in other words?
Not for the majority of dogs.
Yeah, okay.
Like it will affect the appetite of some dogs, where we'll do the fenbendazole and Praziquantel for 2 days, and then fenbendazole for the third day.
Yeah.
By the third day, sometimes it'll affect appetite, and sometimes it's not necessary past that point.
Yeah. There was something that we uncovered by virtue of graphing all of the days that we did breedings, and then when the dogs actually gave birth, and all of that in conjunction with when we were giving fenbendazole and Praziquantel. Can you refresh my memory on when precisely one or both of these medications had to be given for there to be a midline interruption in the gestation of the puppies?
3 weeks.
So 3 weeks, 3 weeks after breeding.
Right. About 20. It was between 20 and 24 days if the combination of Praziquantel and fenbendazole is given we had problems with puppies.
Okay, so most of you are familiar with what a cleft palate looks like. There is a specific stage in the development of a fetus in which the processes are characterized as midline processes, and it's where it has to do with the symmetry in almost any mammal's body. How you got a midline, and then you got a left-hand version on one side and a right-hand version on the other side. That's that overall process is referred to as midline development, and that can be interrupted, and you can end up with voids in the muzzle, in the mouth. You can have interrupted development of teeth. It can be as small as a line of hair going across the top of the skull that is misaligned. It's almost like a mini mohawk, not longer, but just noteworthy by virtue of it being turned in a slightly different direction. That's the mildest version, and it is of no real consequence during the life of the dog, but then it can get to be severe. Some puppies may not even survive. And if, as Brad was noting, by virtue of us graphing we use what's called a Dromensky probe, which measures the vaginal mucus conductivity of an electrical current during each day of the heat, so we know when to breed. Whenever the readings go up and up and up, and then they finally suddenly drop, that's when the female is ovulating. So we have these graphs of which day actually produced which breeding and which day it was that actually produced puppies. So what we discovered was that every now and then we would have a litter that had these midline interruptions. We would have deformities in the mouth, in the muzzle, and some of them even ended up with names like, the ones that weren't so severe but were noticeable would end up with names like butt face. There's some really good dogs out there with names like that recognize the interrupted flow of the midline development. But what we found was that you said 20 to 24 days?
Yeah, 20 to 24 days, sometime in that 3-week period. The breedings are done every other day, so like you're almost certain that the first breeding after the drop of progesterone is the breeding that takes, but it could be the one on the 3rd day after that. So it could be the 21st day or the 24th day. Yeah. So
the point is that dogs that received this fenbendazole or fenbendazole plus praziquantel treatment 20 to 24 days after the apparent conception date, in other words, the breeding that actually produced puppies, it coincided with regularity with dogs that had the interrupted midline development. Now, I don't know that medical science.
Do you want me to show this?
Yeah, show it.
Let's see if I can get this.
We have a picture. So I don't know that science has figured this out yet, and it may well be known to some of these pharmaceutical companies, but they don't readily talk about it. But the reality is, the bottom line is, don't give fenbendazole to a female that was bred in the 20 to 24 day after. 20 to 24 days prior to when you're thinking about worming. So, in reality, what that says to me is, don't worm with fenbendazole. For sure, not in the first 6 weeks after pregnancy. But if they really, really do need to be wormed, I would look for a different wormer. Or there's no indication that it causes any difficulty other than during the midline development period. And so you would probably be okay 6 weeks after the breeding was done. But there's an answer to your question, and I would urge pharmaceutical companies to take note and to look after your customers. Nobody wants deformed puppies.
Do you think worming the minute the first day you see her go into her heat cycle would be the smartest thing to do? Because the only vet I've talked to about this told me, get them wormed before you breed them. And it's like, well, I worm monthly, so how can I know when she's going to come into heat? So it would seem like the smartest thing to do would just be to worm her the first day of her heat cycle. And if she's going to be bred by day 10 or 12, then you should be in good shape.
Well, we, that's on the surface would sound like a good reasonable way to look at it. On the other hand, there are lots of delicate biochemical processes that go on during that time, so there's always the risk that there might be something that takes the heat process out of its natural flow. The ideal thing to do is, if you think she might be coming in heat, go ahead and worm her.
Yeah.
Get that out of the way, and I don't doubt that in some cases it will make them come on into heat more readily, because the female body's willingness to cycle is predicated upon them having a minimum baseline level of health. And if you get parasites out of them, they're more likely to want to make babies if they're healthy themselves.
Yeah.
All right, so we've talked about praziquantel at length. We've covered a danger point in using fenbendazole and praziquantel with respect to pregnant bitches. There was two other things that were brought up to me with respect to comments. One of them was the environmental, addressing the environment to minimize parasites. And the one thing that we do that is there's a couple things that are under the same heading, but that I think help us as much as possible is, on the one hand, any concrete surfaces that we have, we try to coat them with epoxy, because concrete being a naturally porous substance, it provides an infinite number of hiding places for Giardia and Coccidia and bacteria. And if you prepare concrete properly with muriatic acid and etch some of the cement out from around the particles of silica, the sand, that it provides a good bonding substrate, and will create a durable surface that provides no porous cavities for Coccidia, Giardia, and bacteria to hide. Okay, so that covers the concrete surfaces. We routinely use rock dust, and I get a lot of questions from people saying, what is that? They'll see images or videos of our pens. We use rock dust, which is small particles of granite that have fallen through the finest screens at the granite quarry, where they break up granite to make gravel. And the smallest particles are, let's say, roughly the same size as particles of sand, but they differ from sand in that they are jagged. Sand, in most cases, has been rolled around under water for eons, and it's been worn smooth. It's like a bunch of marbles. And let me turn this phone off. And so it's ever mobile. Whenever it gets wet, it becomes fluid with the water and it moves around. And then whenever it's, dogs run on it, it goes everywhere. The fractured pieces of granite from the dust or screenings that come from the granite quarry, they lock into each other. They kind of jam into each other, and the substance becomes a lot more stable. It's still porous. Water will go right through it, but it takes a lot more energy to move it around. Well, of what consequence is that? Well, it makes a very uncomfortable environment for fleas and ticks. These particles, these pieces are jagged, and anywhere that you have a dog or dogs, and you've surrounded the doghouse with rock dust, you have probably eliminated 80% of the fleas that you would normally have, or more. And so your flea control issue is greatly diminished. But over time, you will get a collection of Giardia, Coccidia, and bacteria in the rock dust. Stool is easier to pick up on the rock dust because you're actually able to scoop just a little bit under the feces and pick that up readily. But you take a little bit of the rock dust with you each time. Not a lot, but a little bit. And you will reach a time where you have to replenish the rock dust. You'll have to resurface it. How many times a year do you think each one of our pens gets resurfaced, Brett?
Twice for sure. Some of them 4 times, like the 10x10s. Will get resurfaced 4 times. The 16x16s get
2
resurfaced twice,
Yeah.
But the ones that we have puppies in, they probably get resurfaced 6 to 8 times. Every time a new litter goes into a 16x16 pen, the whole surface is leveled out, soaked in Wizzy Wash to make sure there's no virus in it, and then there's a whole nother level of new rock dust put on it, and then it's soaked in Wizzy Wash again, and then the next day the puppies are allowed to be out in it.
I hope everybody heard that. I don't know if there's any point in me saying it again, since he answered that question or addressed that issue. I will say that Wizzy Wash is a product that you can find on the internet, and essentially it's what you would normally call a gun that screws on the end of your garden hose, and it has a pellet that is probably, it's a cylindrical pellet that is probably 2 inches or more across, 2 to 2.5 inches, and maybe 3-4 inches long. And it goes in a canister on this gun, and you press a trigger, and it sprays a nice flow of water and Wizzy Wash. That's Wiswash. I mispronounced it for a year. I called it Wizzly Wash, but it's Wizzy Wash. Every time I would try to Google search it, I couldn't find it because I couldn't spell it. So anyway, that's the price of ignorance, I guess. But at any rate, I've read their material, and what I gather from reading their material, the substance that's in the Wizzy Wash is, in the broadest generalization, is an acidified chlorine. But somehow, by combining two things that we tend to try to run away from, we end up with something that is not whatsoever harmful to a dog. You know, if you spray some in a water bowl and there's a little bit left, and then you fill that water bowl up without drying it out, no harm comes to your dog. If you spray a floor with it and your dog comes in contact with it, there's no redness, no negative consequence. And they say that it does not promote corrosion in metal. I've not seen any evidence that it does. Have you seen any evidence, Brad?
Not any more than water does.
Yeah. So that's a beautiful thing if you can get the advantages of elevating the pH. I'm trying to remember if elevating or reducing the pH is more acid, but I think you would reduce the pH to make it more acid. pH being percentage of hydrogen ions, but that's a different topic. So at any rate, Brad, whenever he and the crew are prepping the ground surface for a new layer of rock dust, they will thoroughly saturate the ground with this sprayed Wizzy Wash, acidified, chlorinated water, and that makes a huge difference. I have watched it. I'm doubtful about everything, and I watched it with my usual skepticism. And there was a time whenever, every 3 days you had a pen that had a bloody stool in it, and then it got to be every 3 weeks, and it was because Brad had taken it upon himself to utilize that process, and it's made a big difference. So whoever sent in the prompt about preparing the environment in such a way, or treating or adjusting the environment in order to reduce parasites, those would be the main things that we do. Can you think of anything else, Brad, that any major procedure that we utilize that is related to parasite control?
Not really. Like just making sure to stick to your worming schedule, and then if you do use Wizzy Wash, just make sure that if those two things happen at the same time, you should be in great shape.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't worm them and then they pass on whatever onto the ground, and then you just don't cover that with the Wizzy Wash, because then it'll just keep in the cycle. So
that's an excellent point. So if you time your treatment of the ground with your worming, and also with, let me add one more element to this procedural approach to controlling parasites. We do a fair number of rotations with pups and dogs on our premises. Everything is born in what's called the church, which is a 10-run whelping kennel that has radiant heat in the floor. That is, there's 5 different zones that are controlled by 5 different digital thermostats and sensors that are in the concrete, and a on-demand hot water heater, which and a centrifugal pump that pumps the water or propylene glycol, ethylene. No, it's propylene glycol. In these circuits, there's so we have these we have the 5 zones in there, and that's the best place in the world for pups to be born. Each space has 2 different zones, one set at 86 degrees, the other set at 96 degrees, so you have a great heat gradient, so the pups can find the spots that make them comfortable. But what you have there is you have this, as Brad alluded to a while ago, you have ratios of space per animal, and while in the beginning there is sufficient space so that contact with feces is a non-issue, but the ratio of space to feces when a pup gets to be 5 or 6 or 7 weeks old, it's they don't need the heat as much as they need the freedom from contact with feces, which is more guaranteed by space. So we do a lot of rotation. They'll come out of there, and then they'll go into one of the big pens, and so you want to coordinate your resurfacing with the rock dust with the movement of pups from the whelping kennel into a 16 by 16 outdoor pen. So if you coordinate that, then you put them into a pen that has none of the surface has been exposed to any previous pups. It's a new surface. So if you worm the pups before they come out, or treat them from coccidia or giardia, and then move them into the new area, then you have done everything in your power to keep them as parasite-free as possible. So you can extrapolate from that the various times and ways that you could utilize pen or population rotation in conjunction with worming, in conjunction with renewal of surface. You got a 3-variable thing going on there, but if to the extent that you can make it all work out and live in the real world, then you have done the biggest favor you can do for your developing pups by virtue of minimizing the exposure to parasites.
I would only add vaccinations too.
Coordinate the vaccinations with the...
Yeah, before they go out, they're always vaccinated, at least with their first round.
Yeah, we begin our vaccinations, the intranasal bordetella bronchoseptica, as I've said earlier in the husbandry section, is done at 3.5 weeks. And then we begin the parvo vaccination at 6 weeks. So you can go back and listen to that. But imagine that there's a hard and fast rule, and that is before the puppies go out, they should have at least their first parvo vaccination. All right, so the one remaining aspect of the husbandry that was addressed in the comments was the point that I had said little or nothing about coccidia in the initial husbandry video, and it's a truly important thing. There may be some folks out there, and I would have fancied myself to be one of them by this point in time, that can look at a stool and know whether it's giardia or coccidia. But if pressed to do it right now, I'd have a 50-50 chance of getting it right. So there you got basically 2 ways of figuring it out. You can treat for giardia, and if it's still there, then treat for coccidia, or vice versa. Treat for coccidia, and if it's still there after a few days, then switch over to the giardia treatment. Or you can become adept at testing. Vets are quick to tell you that giardia is not the easiest thing in the world to confirm, and even when you do confirm it, unless you can truly see that there's a lot of it, then you don't know whether it's causing the clinical level of symptoms or not. You don't know whether it's causing the bad stool. It could be something else. So once you get past the issue of differentiating between giardia and coccidia, if you've determined that it is in all likelihood coccidia, you can treat this better than your vet can treat it. Vets are still bound by the medical establishment to use, let's see, what is the Albon? And Albon has been used for years, and most of you with any age on you who've been messing with dogs for a while have used it, and you know that it can be very frustrating. It can take more than a week to clear up coccidia, and giving Albon multiple times a day, and it's expensive. We all prayed that there'd be something better. Well, there is something better, but it has not been approved for use in dogs in the United States. Using it for dogs is an off-label use. It's been approved for use in dogs everywhere else in the world except the United States. So it stinks to high heaven of pharmaceutical company profit getting in the way of doing something that's obviously right. Most of us find ways of getting toltrazuril. That's Toltrazuril, and it has a cousin that is also very effective called Panazuril. I've never used Panazuril because basically I didn't need to, because toltrazuril gets the job done. It is scientifically recommended that 1 day is enough. Again, I like to be darn sure. So we will typically give 2 days of toltrazuril. I won't get into this too deeply, but almost anything that you need in the way of medication can be obtained via the internet if you're industrious. And I buy toltrazuril by the kilo, a kilo of powder, and I do the math, and I mix it with my old standby, which is flaxseed oil. That produces a compound. It just means the toltrazuril is suspended in the flaxseed oil, and you have to shake the crap out of it to get it to the homogeneous distribution, so that the ratios that are invoked whenever I do the mixture are actually in effect whenever you're treating the puppy. So I will tell you that the math is relatively easy. Let me first tell you that I'm pretty sure that most of you are not going to go to the trouble that I do and buy a kilo of toltrazuril. You're going to try to find some other source. There is another source. It's approved for cattle in the United States, and the product is called Baycox, Baycox. It's readily available on the internet. It's expensive. The 5% concentration does 1 mill. It's appropriate to treat puppies with the ratio of 1 milliliter treats 5 pounds of body weight. So if you happen to be one who would do what I do, and that is mix up a larger volume based on having the actual 100% pure toltrazuril in your possession, you remember the 5% ratio that's presented in Baycox. And so, for example, if I wanted to mix 1 gram of toltrazuril with 19 grams of flaxseed oil, then that will yield a 5% solution. So that total, that 95% solution, 95% flaxseed oil, 5% toltrazuril solution, each milliliter of that will treat 5 pounds of puppy body weight. And that's essentially how we mix it here. So toltrazuril, I've not heard of any issue with that in terms of safety or in terms of side effects, other than it gets rid of coccidia very, very efficiently. It is absolutely the treatment of choice for dealing with coccidia. Think of anything I've left out there, Brad?
I don't think so.
Okay.